Hey there, folks. Welcome to Chapter 10. We're going to do Chapters 10, 11, and 12 this week. I'm going to try to keep them brief. These are topics that I love to talk about, so no guarantees that they will actually be brief. But it's 2:40 p.m. I'm going to try to have everything ready for a review session at 4 p.m. And I just sent an announcement out about that. So, talk about life. Living things. Living things have shaped this planet dramatically. Many of the properties of this planet, the air, the soil, everything we see around us, these things are all influenced by life. It's easy to see the influence of human life. Everywhere you look, it's easy to see how we as a species have affected this planet. And with a little thought, it's easy to see how other organisms have affected everything. You know how it's harder to think about, choose a random bird like a grackle. It's like, how have grackles changed the environment right around me? Not as obvious, but promise they do have an effect on things. A bigger group, say all of plants or all of birds, it's easier to see. And then there are a lot of things that we don't see, all the bacteria that have had a huge impact in creating soil and creating atmosphere and helping plants grow and helping us digest our food. I mean, our gut is full of bacteria, not so much the stomach or small intestine, but definitely the large intestine. Anyway, tiny organisms, we don't necessarily see everything they're doing, but they're incredibly important. If we didn't have decomposers, then the planet would have filled up with poop a long time ago, wouldn't it? Okay, so all living things meet some basic characteristics, and it's actually pretty tough sometimes to tell, is something alive or is it not alive? Now you can look at a rock and say, well, that's not alive, but there are living things on that rock. Just pick up any rock, there's life on that rock. You just can't see the bacteria that are on there. So I pick up, here's a piece of paper. This piece of paper is not alive. But if I were to take this piece of paper and rub it on a sterile petri dish that had some growth medium in there, some growth agar, I promise there are bacteria that are on here. How do I know that? Because I've touched this piece of paper, because it's sitting out. There are bacteria there, there are mold spores there, there's life on this piece of paper. That's tough to identify because they're very small. Cells are tiny, and all living things are composed of cells. And so even though I'm big, I'm composed of very tiny cells, trillions of them. And my cells are actually pretty large compared to a bacterial cell. You could pack 1,000 bacterial cells onto one of my cells or in one of my cells without too much trouble. So we're used to thinking of animals and plants and bigger organisms, bigger multicellular organisms. Most of the history of this planet, we didn't have multicellular life. It was dominated by the bacteria. And it's still dominated by the bacteria. We just don't think of it that way because we dominate the planet to such an extent. But trust me, the bacteria still, as a group, are dominating this planet. And insects, as another group. They're animals. They are multicellular. Their cells are organized into tissues. Their tissues are organized into organs. Their organs are organized into organ systems. A grasshopper has circulating blood. Well, it's kind of hemolymph. So they've got a circulatory system with hearts and stuff. They have a respiratory system, different than ours. They don't have a diaphragm, but they're still moving air in and doing exchange of gases and so forth. Life is incredibly abundant, incredibly diverse, and yet there are a lot of commonalities about life. And one of the things about life is that it's organized into cells. So you need at least one cell to be considered alive. And an interesting side note is that viruses do not have a cell membrane. So a virus technically is not alive. Some people would argue that it is, but really it's just a packet of DNA enclosed in some proteins, and it can't do anything on its own. It cannot use energy, can't transform energy on its own. it needs to get inside one of your cells, or the cells of a plant, or the cells of a dog, or the cells, or a cell of a bacteria. Bacteria get sick too by viruses, and that bit of DNA gives new instructions to that cell and turns that cell into a virus factory. That's what a viral infection is. But the virus itself is not considered alive. It's just this rogue bit of DNA that tricks your system. And yeah, so viruses are just on the edge of life. What about a seed? Is it alive? Well, you can't tell until you plant it. So again, it's not always simple to know is something alive. A bacterial endospore, which is kind of like a seed for a bacteria, basically some bacteria, they're able to dehydrate and close up their nuclear material, their DNA, into a little ball that's very protected. And this little ball can last a very, very, very long time. You can send them out into space, into the vacuum and freezing cold of space. You can put them into boiling water. You can kill them, if you, not boiling necessarily. Some will die in boiling, some won't. But if you pressure cook them at a higher than boiling temperature, if you put them in a flame, they're not indestructible. But just by itself, this little endospore of a bacteria, let's just say that the bacteria dries up and it's just in the dust. Okay, it's sitting on this piece of paper. The endospore is not growing. It's not doing anything. And let's just say I set this piece of paper and I forget it for 5 years. And that endospore has sat there, dried up, doing nothing for 5 years. If I then give it moisture and nutrients, ta-da, it starts to actively reproduce. It basically rehydrates, the bacterial enzymes start cranking again, and you'll have bacterial growth. And 5 years is nothing for a bacterial endospore. You can let it sit for 50 years. You can let it sit for 500 years. Some suggest that you could let them sit for millions of years. So, weird. So I just wanted to point out that the line between life and not life is not always easy to determine. Okay. I didn't modify the slides at all because I knew it would take me forever if I started changing things. Animals and plants are the main ones we're going to consider. I love bacteria, talking about them. Fungi are an amazing group, but we're going to focus mostly animals and plants. Animals eat other living things. Okay, that's what they do. They either eat plants, or they eat animals, or they eat both. That's, or and they might eat living stuff, or they might eat stuff that's already dead, but they're eating other life. Plants don't have to do that. Plants are getting their energy source from the sun. So animals need to eat to have energy, so that they can then do all their cellular reactions. A cell is an extremely busy place with many thousands of cellular chemical reactions going on. So either you need a power source from outside, and in case of plants it's the sun, and so they put out solar collectors, their leaves, to collect energy from the sun and manufacture their own food, which they build sugars. They build sugars out of carbon dioxide and water. They build these sugars, and then they actually use the sugars in the same way that your cells use it. And how your cells use sugars, carbohydrates, and oxygen, the reason you eat and the reason you breathe is to make a funny little chemical called ATP, adenosine triphosphate. ATP is an energy token that runs all the cellular reactions. And an interesting thing is that is one of the commonalities of life. It doesn't matter if it's me or a tree or a worm or a bacteria. All of them are using ATP, 100%. And the tools for making this ATP molecule are common to basically all life. There are a few different ways to do it, but so plants, to drive the production, it's kind of weird. Why ATP? And I know the slide has nothing to do with ATP here, so I should get back on track here. But the reason you eat is for an energy source, and the same thing for the reason you breathe. in your cells you have an organelle called the mitochondrion, and it takes the food and the oxygen, and you end up with carbon dioxide and water. And in taking apart that food and the oxygen, it's releasing energy. Okay, you need the oxygen to take apart the food and release the energy. You capture some of that energy in new chemical bonds, in chemical bonds of ATP. Most of the energy you lose is heat. It's only about 40% efficient. 60% lost is heat. So you do this in your cells, and food, carbohydrate, sugar, sugar and oxygen. You break it apart. You release energy. That released energy, 40% is captured in the bonds of ATP, so you can run your cell. The byproducts are carbon dioxide and water. Now, what does a plant do? A plant takes carbon dioxide and water and combines them now into a sugar and releases oxygen as a byproduct. So it's the same process backwards, essentially. And you eating and breathing releases energy. A plant taking that carbon dioxide and water and putting it together as sugar and oxygen uses energy. So it gets energy from the sun. So the plant puts energy into the system and builds complex molecules. You, as an animal, take apart those complex molecules and release that energy. Where did the energy come from? It came from the sun. Energy from the sun coming in, energy that wasn't, in the sun but stored in the sugar, now coming out. So it's this crazy thing. But basically, the whole planet is solar powered. All life is very dependent on the sun. And technically, there are a few exceptions, bacteria who are getting energy from radiation or from volcanic heat at the bottom of the ocean, but we'll skip those guys. So plants are manufacturing their food. They're acquiring energy from the sun, building complex molecules. Animals are taking apart those molecules and making them simpler molecules, which the plants can then use again. Animals, of course, were known for moving. 5 million different kinds of living organisms. It's approximate. It's very, very approximate. We've named most of the lizards, most of the birds, most of the mammals. Those are easy. Insects, how many insects really species are there out there? It's much harder to name all the insects. Bacteria, we're hardly even getting started. For a long time, all we cared about were the bacteria that actually made us sick, and that's a very, very, very small portion of all the bacteria that are out there. So now we're more interested in what are all the dozens of types of bacteria that are living on my skin? What are the hundreds of types of bacteria that are living inside of me? We're starting to answer those questions, but and then what are the bacteria living in the dirt outside my house? What are the bacteria living on the leaves? What are the bacteria living inside my cat? There are bacteria everywhere, and so we're barely getting started, and it's actually really hard to tell, what is this species and how is it different from this species, and to give them names when all of them are just little microscopic dots. And what are you going to call them? How do you tell how they're related to each other, and where do you draw the line for one species versus another species? So it gets messy and complex. Okay, it's much tidier with plants and animals, so let's look at that. We have these groupings: kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. Now, if you can't remember the order, think of King Philip came over for goose soup. And then there's subspecies if you want. There's actually a domain that's above kingdom as well. So it really goes domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. You don't need subspecies necessarily. You can put sub anything. You can have a subfamily, you could have a suborder, a subclass. But kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species has been around for a long time. It's very helpful. Species is really kind of the only real, nature defines it, kind of. The rest is kind of more for our convenience, but it is related to, you know, it does show relationships between all these living things. So I was talking with my kids about this just the other day, my younger kids, because my son, who's 7, asked if fish were the, you know, what besides fish were vertebrates. And I said, you know, okay, so a vertebrate, that's a phylum. You know, the things with backbones. All the things with backbones are in the same phylum, and that includes fish, which are their own class, and amphibians, which are their own class, and reptiles, and birds, and mammals. These are all different classes, but they're in the same phylum, and they're all in the same kingdom of animals. And there are things that are in a different phylum, you know, like a crab or a snail or an octopus. They don't have a backbone, so they're not in the same phylum as fish and amphibians and reptiles and birds and mammals. So then within the class, I said, you know, okay, so here are the different phyla of chordates or vertebrates. Class, we're in a class of mammals, and so is the dog, and so is our cat. But we are not in the same order as our dog and cat. We're in an order of primates. The dog and cat are in the order of carnivores. And this order of carnivores also includes things like bears. But a bear is in a different family than a dog. So there's a bear family within the order of carnivores. Within the class of mammals, there's a bear family, which includes the black bear, the grizzly bear, the panda, and the Asiatic black bear, the sun bear, the sloth bear. So there are several bears around the world. They're all in the bear family. There are lots of different types of dogs, the wolves and the foxes and the dogs of the world. They're in the dog family. And there's a cat family that includes the lions and the tigers and the house cats and many different cats. So, and we are in a totally different order, because we're not a carnivore. We are in the primate order, the order of primates, which includes us and gorillas and chimps and monkeys, and their anatomical characteristics that put us in this order of primates within the class of mammals. Anyhow, so let's just choose the dog family and then look at the different genera and species as an example. So the dog family, the one genus that's pretty common is Canis. Canis, and when you talk about a species, you give the genus and species together. So Canis lupus, Canis is the genus, lupus is the species. That's a wolf, Canis lupus. Now Canis lupus, and then you can do a subspecies if you want to say, well, the northern gray wolf versus the southern gray wolf or something like that. Canis latrans, same genus, different species, is the coyote, Canis latrans. Canis domesticus is the domestic dog. And you could argue that different breeds of dogs are kind of different subspecies. A breed is not, it's a made-up thing of men. It's not nature's. Subspecies is these. It's a population that could breed with this other population, but they don't usually, because maybe there's a mountain between them, and so they look a little bit different. They've been apart for a long time. But if, occasionally they do come in contact with each other and they breed easily, and so they're still the same species, but they're different subspecies. And again, where do you draw the line? There's an eastern meadowlark and a western meadowlark, and they sing different songs, a little bit different songs. But on the, there's an area where they both come together, and sometimes they mate with each other. So where do you draw the line between species? Do you call it a subspecies, or do you call it a separate species? That's just the job of people who study these groupings, this taxonomy, and the experts have to decide, how different is different enough to call it a different species, how similar is similar enough that we should just call it a subspecies. Anyway, so the Canidae, the dog family, Canis is one genus, Vulpes is another. So foxes, red foxes are in the genus Vulpes. But a kit fox is not in the genus Vulpes. What's the genus of a kit fox? Having a mind blank. It's not, I don't think it's Vulpes. It's a different genus. Anyway, so you can have several genera within one family. And they're going to be related, but different enough. Again, these groupings are a little bit arbitrary. People have to decide, but sometimes it's pretty easy to decide, okay, this goes in the cat family, this goes in the dog family. Sometimes it's trickier to decide. Is a red panda more like a bear or more like a raccoon? Comes down to the anatomy, comes down to, nowadays, it comes down to looking at the genetics and building a tree of relatedness. And so now we have this tree of life that's more and more based on genetics. And we can see how everything's related, and we can estimate how long ago this group branched off here, this group branched off here. Did snakes come from lizards? Did lizards come from snakes? Did they share a common ancestor? What was it? And that we can answer those questions a lot better now as we have more and more genetic tools available to us. So, okay, you have these slides, so I'm not going to go through, because that's just another example of us and a mouse. We're in the same phylum. We both have backbones, so we're vertebrates, or this chordata. We're in the same class of mammals because we both have fur, we both produce milk, but totally different orders. And by the way, the order Rodentia is the most successful order of mammals. There are more rodents than any, more species of rodents than any other type of mammal. Primates, you could say, we're the most successful. You could say we're the most successful species on the planet in many ways, in terms of the number of resources of the planet that we're using. By that measure, we're the most successful. But if you look at the group primates, there aren't very many primates compared to the number of rodents, not even close. And there aren't anywhere near the number of mammals as fish. And there aren't nearly as many things with backbones as things that don't have backbones. The arthropods, which includes the insects, is way more successful than any other group of animals. And you could say, well, yeah, animals are the best. No. Bacteria. Bacteria still rule the planet. They still rule the planet. There's not a living thing out there that doesn't have close association with bacteria. In other words, if the bacteria didn't give your species permission to be here, your species wouldn't be here. Every species has to get along with bacteria, or else they don't make it. Bacteria do rule the planet. And if you get abducted by an extraterrestrial tonight, which maybe will happen, they suck you up and they just put you in instead of just trying to look at you and identify you, what if they just put you in the blender and decide to just go based on your genes? And what would happen is you actually have the bacterial cells, remember, they're very small, and you've got packed into your large intestine way more bacterial cells than you have human cells through the rest of your body, because your human cells are big and they're kind of spaced apart. So those aliens would say, oh, we've got 90% mixed bacteria, but we have 10% mammal here, 10% primate. That's interesting. How did we get 90% mixed colony of bacteria with 10% mammal thrown in there? I wonder how these bacteria got up and moved around like that. So, and that's the case with pretty much any mammal. It's mostly going to be, walking bacteria. It's crazy to think about. So you should never feel alone, because you've got a whole, you are the ruler of an empire of bacteria, and you feed them every day, and you care for them, you give them a nice place to live. There are more bacteria in your mouth than there are people on the planet. So don't feel lonely. Okay, vertebrates versus invertebrates. You can tell this is my favorite subject, and so, man, I gotta get going faster. Chapter 10 is my best chapter here. So, moving on. Vertebrates, animals with backbones. And we've gone over that. Fish, amphibians, reptiles, birds, mammals. Invertebrates, they don't have backbones. Insects, spiders, jellyfish, corals. Those are not all one phylum, by the way. Those are, jellyfish is a phylum, and insects and spiders are in a different phylum. Mammals. We love mammals because, hey, we're a mammal and we like things that are like us, right? We like warm, fuzzy, cute things. For some reason, my snake isn't. show and tell today. Now, why is it that this cute creature doesn't get us as much sympathy from us as another cute creature, right? So here's this cute creature. This is my pet scorpion that I brought from Arizona. I caught it out in the desert. So this is a giant hairy scorpion. This is not a mammal. It doesn't have big eyes. It's not warm. It's not fuzzy. It's not furry. It's actually quite friendly. I like it. I think it's kind of cute. It's interesting. But we like things that are more like us. So say goodbye to Scorpion. He leads a quiet life in a small box. It's a very low maintenance pet, by the way. You know, I only have to feed it every couple of weeks. Give it a little bit of water before I send it to bed. Okay. So back to mammals, because we're so focused on ourselves. You know, that's natural. We're kind of egotistical that way. We're focused on ourselves and other things that are kind of like us. So mammals, we have fur. We live all over the planet as a group, and we produce milk. That's what the word mammal comes from, mammary glands. Mammary glands produce milk. Humans are kind of strange mammals in a lot of ways. Unusual, but we are mammals, definitely. Some mammals will, you know, in a cold climate, mammals rely on a warm body temperature, and it takes a lot of energy to produce that warm body temperature. That scorpion, I said I can only, you know, I can feed it every 2 weeks. I can feed it every month, and it will be okay. It's not trying to maintain a high body temperature. It's not trying to maintain a constant internal body temperature. That's very difficult to do. So mammals have to eat a lot. Now, if you live up north and it snows and you can't find food anymore, well, you either have to find food or you're going to die, or you can go bury yourself under the ground and wait for spring. And so some mammals are able to hibernate, and during hibernation their body temperature drops down, their heart rate slows down, they're using less energy, they're trying to just survive on their fat reserves. Just okay, I hope I can make it till spring. You know, it's true hibernators like squirrels, if you dig them up in the middle of winter, they can't run away at all. They can't move. They're just out of it. This is an old picture. Here's a picture of my wife with a big bear. It's not been shot, it's been drugged. So she studied black bears for her master's thesis, and here she is with two little bear cubs. This is just before we got married. And so you probably can't tell just how cute that is, but those little cubs are adorable. Bears are not true hibernators. When we go to the bear dens in the winter, the bears are looking out at us and they're totally awake. You know, like, what are you doing here? It's February. Go away. Okay, mammals. Value of mammals. Humans, how do we value mammals? Well, we like to eat them, right? We like to eat steaks. We like to eat pork. We like to eat chicken, but that's not a mammal, right? Mammals have fur. They produce milk. We use them for clothing, tools, transportation, protection, companionship. We value mammals. We like things that are like us. Most mammals. We don't really value mice too much. Rats. Yeah, they get a bad name. Too bad. The main thing is that milk. That's a common thing. And that doesn't mean that all mammals are great. Well, they all produce milk for their young, but this platypus and the echidna, they are very primitive mammals. They don't have defined nipples. They just kind of sweat milk onto the fur, and the babies lick it up. So mammary glands are modified sweat glands. It's basically sweat, and you start adding proteins and fats to it and put a delivery system of a nipple. And this is pretty cool. You know, you can care for a baby outside. You don't, instead of just laying an egg and saying goodbye, good luck. You know, it's a way to care for babies. Hair covering the bodies, the mammalian brain. Ooh, we're so smart. Endothermic, warm-blooded. We hear about warm-blooded, cold-blooded, endothermic, ectothermic is better. Therm is referring to temperature. Endo is within, maintaining temperature based on internal processes. Ecto is outside. So ectothermic, like a lizard, it relies on the outside temperature for its own body temperature. Mammals have an advanced heart, a four-chambered heart. This has to do with the fact that we're using so much energy that we need an efficient system to move oxygen around, because that ATP production relies on oxygen. So you need to deliver oxygen all over your body, especially your brain. Your brain is a very expensive organ. It uses 2% of your body's mass. It's only 2% of your weight, but it's about 20% of your energy use. So just thinking hard and studying hard does use a significant amount of calories. About 20% of your calories goes to your brain. Okay, so it's expensive. Use it well. Now, these different examples here, it's important that we included the platypus and the kangaroo, and over here the armadillo. It could have been almost any other mammal. The platypus is strange because it lays eggs. It does not give live birth. Only the platypus and the echidna. So that's a very primitive mammal there. These are called monotremes. And the monotremes, they're mostly gone. They're mostly extinct. Okay, we have echidnas and platypus. That's it. So they lay little eggs that hatch, and then they just sweat the milk. They don't even have defined nipples. Marsupials, like kangaroos and koalas and most Australian mammals, marsupials give birth to tiny undeveloped embryo. Right? A great big kangaroo could be 5-6 feet tall. It's going to give birth to a jelly bean, and that little jelly bean has to crawl from the vagina into the pouch and get stuck onto a little nipple. My wife thinks this is a great idea. Why grow an 8-pound baby and then you have to get it through that opening? Why do that? Why not just give birth to a jelly bean and stick it in a pouch? And then during 9 months of development, people say, how's that baby doing? Oh, check it out. So my wife thinks that's a great idea, marsupial. But having a placenta is the dominant form of mammalian reproduction. So an armadillo, you, a cow, a cat, a bear, an elk, a bat, a walrus, a whale, all these diverse mammals have a placenta, and so they give birth to a much more developed baby. The placenta allows that baby to really grow and develop inside the womb, added protection for a longer time before giving birth. That's the big advantage. So, marsupialism is cool, much easier on the mom to give birth to a jelly bean, but apparently having a placenta is better. Survival advantage. The smallest mammal is a tiny little bat, a bumblebee bat, and there's also a shrew that's competing for tiny little shrew. Now, let me just give you a little thought problem here. If you have a pot of soup that you made for dinner, and then you're going to put it in the fridge, if you put the whole big pot into the fridge, how long is it going to take before it's completely cooled down to refrigerator temperature right in the middle of the pot? That's going to take a long time. What if instead you take that pot of soup and you pour it out into 10 different containers, and these containers are much smaller, and you put those containers around the fridge? How long is it going to take before all the soup is cooled down to refrigerator temperature? Much less time. So the smaller the container, the more the outside air has an influence over the temperature. This is a serious problem for mammals. The smaller you get, the harder it's going to be to stay warm inside. So if you're a mouse, you have to eat a tremendous amount to stay warm, just to maintain that body temperature. Even though you're small, you're eating proportionally to your body size. You're eating much more than an elephant. Yes, an elephant's eating hundreds of pounds of food a day, but it's massive. And so proportional to body size, the mouse is eating more. And if you're flying, if you're a bat and you're flying, that takes a tremendous amount of energy. So to be small and flying, you have to eat like crazy. You know, it'd be equivalent of me eating, I don't know, half of my weight in hamburgers or something, 500 hamburgers or something. Well, no, I don't weigh that much, but anyway, maybe. Okay, so bats, because they use so much energy, they'll go into a cave for the daytime and basically hibernate for the daytime. You know, drop their body temperature down, slow their heart rate down, try to survive without food for that period of time. It's very difficult. Largest mammals, also the largest thing that's ever lived on the planet as far as we know. The blue whale is larger than any dinosaur. So you can see a picture of old whalers working around the mouth of this thing. It is an enormous beast. And it's interesting that it's eating small stuff. It's filtering plankton and little tiny shrimp and stuff from the water. So it just opens his mouth and it has these filters that it just pushes the water through and traps all the small stuff and just swallows that. Okay, I'm jumping past this because we talked about it. The echidna and platypus lay little eggs. Marsupials aren't on here, but they are the ones that have pouches, and they give birth to an undeveloped embryo that goes into the pouch to finish development. And then the placental mammals that have an embryonic sac and a placenta that attaches to the uterus through an umbilical cord. So an echidna and a platypus, they have no belly button. Too bad. No belly button for a kangaroo either. I don't think there's an umbilical cord because there's no placenta. Okay, and here's marsupial, which I would have put in between because it's more complex than laying eggs, but less complex than having a placenta. So very immature. This is past the jelly bean stage. The marsupial that we have around here is the possum, and it's the only marsupial that we have around here. And so they're going to give birth to tiny little jelly beans. They do have a little pouch, not really a developed pouch. They mostly just kind of hang on for dear life. Interesting side note, kangaroos, they can have two babies of two different ages attached to two different nipples, and they produce two different qualities of milk. They cater the milk to the growth stage of the baby. So kangaroos actually kind of win the prize for complex milk production. Oh, and speaking of milk, something like a seal or a whale that has to put on a lot of fat to stay warm, to stay insulated from the cold water, because water will suck the heat right out of you. So they need a thick layer of body fat. Their milk is extremely fatty. So a whale can put on, I want to say, hundreds of pounds a day. It's just extremely thick, fatty milk. Would you like to taste it if you had the chance? It'd be kind of weird, wouldn't it? But we drink cow milk, which, if you think about it, is pretty weird to be drinking milk from another species. Okay, so how long between fertilization and birth? 2 weeks in a mouse, or 16 days in a hamster, 650 days in an elephant, which, darn, that's a long time, well over a year, almost 2 years. And, well, okay, so 3 weeks in mice, 63 days, dog and cats, about 266 in humans. It varies. And how developed the young is going to be when it comes out also varies. A horse comes out and it's got to be able to stand up and walk around and start running pretty quickly. Humans, we're helpless for years, basically. We are the most helpless of mammals for the longest period of time. In other words, we have the highest degree of parental care. Babies won't survive without the parent for the longest time. Think of some other helpless mammal, like a mouse is helpless as a baby, but it's only helpless for a couple of weeks, 3 weeks maybe, before it can live on its own. Humans win the prize. Elephants probably come close. They're pretty dependent on their parents for a long time, but nothing compared to humans. We're crazy like that. Other things, do care for their young. There's some spiders carry their babies around on their back, or that scorpion will carry babies around for a while. Some snakes care for their babies a little bit. but most other animals don't care for their babies. They're like, oh, good luck, you're on your own. So most spiders, have zero care for their young, or most reptiles or insects. Okay, so just some groups. We're looking at phyla here. So kingdom of animals, phyla, chordata. So looking at class. If we talk about fish, this is a class. And these are the oldest vertebrate group. So fish are the most primitive vertebrates, or chordates. And 500 million years on this planet is a long time. And most vertebrates are fish. Well, at least half of all vertebrates are fish. So very diverse group. Agnatha, jawless fish. You should look up a video about hagfish slime. I'm not going to show you because I'm actually trying to be fast. But I love hagfish, and I love their slime production. It's amazing. Technically, fish aren't just one class. There's class Agnatha, which is jawless fish, for lampreys and hagfish, very primitive. And then we have class Gnathostomata, which is jawed fish. Gnathostomata. That's really weird, but stoma is an opening. We're going to see the word stomata when we talk about plants and the leaves and the openings on the leaves, the little microscopic openings. But gnathal, that's a weird word. What does it even mean? Does it mean jaw? Not even sure. But jawed fishes includes two orders, chondrichthyes and osteichthyes. Ichthyes means fish. Chondra is referring to cartilage, so cartilaginous fishes. Fish that don't have a bony skeleton, they have cartilage skeletons, so sharks and rays. These are more primitive and have been around for a longer time than the osteichthyes. The osteichthyes are the bony fish, and this is what, when we think of a fish, this is what we typically think of, because there are way more species. This has been a very successful group. So even though the sharks and rays have been around longer, and the Agnatostomata, the Agnathas, have been around even longer, the bony fish, the osteichthyes, oste referring to bone, these guys have been around. They haven't been around as long, but they've been very successful. They've taken over the world of fish. And so most fish that you see are going to be osteichthyes. Okay, amphibia means two life, because of their, the metamorphosis, the life in the water, the life on land sort of thing. And there's a lot of variation in the development, but basically amphibians rely on the water to lay their eggs. The egg hatches into a little embryonic state, a tadpole, that eventually changes, grows, metamorphoses into an adult. Like fish, they are ectothermic. So fish, reptiles, and amphibians are all ectotherms. Birds and mammals are endotherms. They generate that internal body temperature. How are reptiles and amphibians different? Well, amphibians, they must go to a moist place to lay their eggs. They have no scales on their skin, so they're much more reliant on keeping their skin moist. They don't have claws, and they use that moist skin for part of their breathing. They don't actively breathe, but just passively rely on their skin for gas exchange. And they tend to be a little slimy to protect themselves from drying out. So amphibians include things like salamanders, frogs, and caecilians. Caecilians, you're never going to see them. They live underground in the tropics, and they look kind of like, giant squiggly worms? They're pretty weird. Frogs and salamanders. Frogs includes the toads. There are a few salamanders around here, and quite a few species of frogs and toads. These are all amphibians, and these are in the same class, but Kingdom Phylum, King Philip came over, Kingdom Phylum class order. The salamanders are in a different order than the frogs, which are in a different order than the caecilians. And within the order of frogs, there are going to be several families. Within the order of salamanders, there are going to be several families. Within the order of caecilians, there aren't very many families. There's not much diversity of caecilians. They might all be in one family. I don't know. I should know. I will I shouldn't have admitted that I don't know. I'll know Sicilians better soon. Okay, a reptile like a snake or a turtle or a crocodile or a lizard, these guys, they're also ectothermic, but they have a dry, scaly skin. Basically, think of the progression of fish to amphibians to reptiles as adaptations for life on land. And as you live on land, the main thing is don't dry out. Don't dry out. So having scaly skin that's waterproof so that you don't lose the water from your body. Big, important thing. But you can't breathe through your skin anymore if it's all dried out like that. So better lungs, better breathing with the lungs. Claws to climb around on land. Lay eggs, and an egg that's different than amphibian egg. The reptile egg is a big leap forward. Amphibian egg has to stay in the water or in a very moist environment. The reptile egg has a shell around it, and it's sometimes just a very leathery shell, and it still needs a moist environment, but it can be kind of a hard, dry shell. And think of birds, that's basically a progression of the reptile egg. Birds, secretly, birds are a group of reptiles. They're a very highly evolved, very diverse group of reptiles, but technically they're reptiles. They're weird reptiles, so we put them in a different group. We put them in a different class, even though technically they're reptiles. Okay, so class Reptilia includes the turtles. The Testudinata is the order, and there are going to be several families. Can you find the class order family? There are going to be several families of turtles. Carapace is the upper shell, Plastron's the lower shell. Dr. Foley is quite the turtle expert. There's a Rio Grande cooter is a type of turtle that lives locally, that is abundant locally, but as a species it's in quite a bit of trouble potentially due to problems with the water quality of the Rio Grande and other things. Okay, crocodiles, or crocodilia includes alligators and crocodiles. This is not a very diverse group, but it's a very ancient group, and so most of the species are extinct, and we have a handful of species, several species that are still alive today. And these guys are interesting. They show parental care. They build a nest, and they watch over their eggs, and they talk to their babies while they're hatching, and they care for them a little while after they've hatched. Lizards, I really like lizards. Lizards and snakes are both great. I like them a lot. Should we do another show and tell? I do have a snake here in my office. Lizards are different than snakes in that they have eyelids and they have external ear openings. Snakes don't have either of those, and the tail of the lizard can break off easily, whereas the tail of a snake's not going to. And snakes, by the way, they are an offshoot of lizards. So snakes are a group of lizards that developed special characteristics associated with not having arms and legs. So the order Squamata includes both snakes and lizards. And so here's a case where we said, well, let's divide these up. We'll have a suborder that includes just the lizards and a suborder that includes just the snakes. Because technically a snake is, it's the same group as lizards. It fits within lizards. So technically snakes are lizards, but we don't like to do that, so we divide them up. And so we have a separate suborder. And then we go to families. Several families of lizards, several families of snakes. Very cool groups. So snakes don't have eyelids, no external ear openings. Okay, so I'm just going to pull out my snake here. Okay, the snake, my office is air conditioned, so my snake's pretty slow right now, and you can see maybe on the camera its eyes are really clouded over. It's going to shed its skin. So when you have a dry, scaly skin, you can't just shed little flakes of it all the time like mammals do. Instead, you peel out of the whole thing at once, and it's very close to shedding. It'll probably shed today or tomorrow. So it's almost blind right now because its eyes are so clouded over, and basically it will, rub until it opens up on the nose and then peel off its skin, kind of like coming out of a sock. But no external ear openings. It does have some hearing, but the bones that are associated with hearing, your inner ear bones or middle ear bones, your malleus, incus, and stapes, the bones in your middle ear are in the jaw in the snake, and those bones allow the snake to really open its mouth. And so the mammalian ear is much more sensitive, and it's partly by use of those little bones that in a lizard or snake are part of the jaw. Lizards have probably better hearing than snakes, but snakes do have some hearing. They're still picking up vibrations through the ground and through the air. They just don't have ears. They don't have an eardrum either, so probably their hearing's not too good. Some are venomous. This one's not, but venom is a modified saliva. So you have salivary glands, and it's not just water. What else is in that saliva? Well, there's some proteins, and some of those proteins start to break down starches, so that when you're chewing up a cracker, you're already starting to break it down chemically a little bit. A snake just has advanced proteins. A venomous snake, bam, it bites the mouse. Some of the proteins are going to kill the mouse, which is very handy because, look, if you're trying to fight something and all you can use is your mouth and your body, you can't use your arms or legs, and the other thing has arms and legs and claws and teeth, it can be very dangerous to catch and kill a prey item. So using fangs and injecting venom, that's brilliant. Just let the thing die without you having to touch it again. Just bam, touch it once very quickly and then let it die. And it can die very quickly sometimes. Some of these guys, some snakes are very venomous. And it is just modified saliva. Just saliva with special proteins. And those proteins, you get bitten by a rattlesnake and it's going to start digesting your arm. Breaking down your muscle tissues, breaking down your blood. And it looks really disgusting and it might kill you. Okay. See the tongue coming out? It's a very important sensory organ for snakes. They flick the tongue out, they bring it in, and then they stick it up into this special organ right here called the Jacobson's organ. It's not the nose, it's not the nostril, so they do smell a little bit probably through their nose, but they stick their tongue up. They have two little openings, one for each side, into the Jacobson's organ, and that gives the snake a lot of chemical information, which smelling is a chemical sense. And so this is a very refined sense of smell, really. It's kind of tasting the air and sticking that up there. And, it's able to tell just by having the fork of the tongue, which way did the mouse go. And it works pretty well. Okay, into birds, which, like I say, technically they're reptiles, but no, we call them a separate class because they are very different. For one thing, they're endothermic. They're endothermic, meaning they maintain their internal body temperature, so it requires a lot of food. A bird has to eat a lot compared to its body weight because it wants to keep warm, because it's flying, which takes a lot of energy, and because it's pretty small. They also have feathers, which is a big deal. Feathers are modified scales, so these scales don't keep this snake warm. So probably feathers evolved first as a means of keeping warm for an endothermic animal. In other words, if you're trying to conserve body heat, if you're trying to use internal body heat, you're going to want to conserve it. And so mammals, we have a fat layer, we have fur. Birds, they have feathers and to keep the heat in. So probably was first for thermal regulation before the feathers developed for flight. A little tiny bee hummingbird is the smallest bird, similar in size to that bumblebee bat. Largest is an ostrich, not anywhere close to the size of a blue whale. There were historically larger birds that early humans wiped out, like an elephant bird in New Zealand. But still, impressive to have a 300-pound bird that can run 40 miles an hour. Can't fly, but can run. Fastest flyer is a peregrine falcon in a dive, 200 miles an hour. Fastest moving animal, unless you stick a human in a jet. Okay. Again, their feathers are modified scales. They have scaly legs like reptiles. They are endothermic. They are maintaining that internal body temperature. Streamlined bodies, lightweight bones. That, there's trade-off between being lightweight and being prone to breaking. If a bird breaks its wing, that's it. It's done for. Large body surface to body volume ratio. That gets back to the pot of soup and putting it into small containers versus one large container. Because birds are relatively small, they're losing heat pretty easily. And so a lot of birds will eat their own body weight daily. That's a lot. If you needed to eat 100, 200 pounds of hamburgers every day, good luck with that. So birds are always hungry. They're always looking for food. Process of natural selection. We could take a whole course to talk about this, and I'm coming up on my hour, and so I can't talk much about this, and I feel bad because evolution's largely misunderstood. But basically, natural selection, everything's going to die. A lot of things are going to die before they ever reproduce, right? So a mouse has 10 babies. Not all 10 babies are going to grow up and have babies themselves. So which will survive, which won't? It's largely a random process, okay? But if one mouse has some sort of advantage over another, maybe its color blends in better, maybe it runs a little faster, maybe it can sense a snake a little better than another one, it might have a slightly better chance of surviving. So over time, many generations, populations can evolve. Individuals cannot evolve. I can't evolve, but humans as a population, as a species, can change over time. So these are species that Darwin recognized differences in these beaks on the Galapagos Islands. And this is interesting. What do I have here? Is this a wren? Is this one a grosbeak? It turned out they were all related to each other, and you can kind of see that. But they evolved different beaks over time. The different populations started using, one specialized more on insects, another specialized more on seeds, another one specialized on even larger seeds. This one used, insects and learned to use sticks to poke it, get them out of holes. That's a very poor discussion of natural selection. It does not do it justice. Too bad. Moving on. Birds have a variety of feathers. The contour feathers are involved in flight and kind of covering the bird body, keeping it streamlined. The down feathers are going to be right next to the body. They're fluffy and they keep in the heat, which is very important. And then there are phyloplume feathers. Monitors the movement and position of adjacent contour feathers. This is more for the bird to have a sense of its feather positions, so you see birds preening themselves all the time, putting their feathers back into place so that they can be effective flyers. Very quick overview of feather anatomy. There's the quill that, a quill pen, we used to write with quills, runs down the midline, and then we have, the quill is the tip. Like, think of the quill pen. The quill is the tip that's inside the bird, and then the shaft runs down the length of the feather, and then coming off of the shaft, you have barbs and coming off of barbs, you have barbules, and coming off of barbules, you have little tiny hooklets. It's just branching. It's just a branching pattern. So the shaft goes to barbs, which goes to barbules, which can go to little hooklets. Okay. It's just a branching pattern. And the cool thing is it kind of they kind of zip together. If you get a feather and you peel apart the little barbs, and then you know, pretend like a bird preening, and you kind of pull them, you'll see that they kind of zip together there. Lots of adaptations, but this is just one example of adaptations through natural selection. But look at the variety of bird feet, variety of bird beaks, and you know how they fit different environments. Now, notice there is not a one-size-fits-all. There is not a perfect solution. Evolution does not give perfect solutions. There are things that work better for particular environments, for particular feeding habits. But, you know, so a duck's beak on a hawk would not be a very helpful thing, right? If a hawk had the beak of a duck, how's it going to tear apart its prey? It can't do it. If a duck had the feet of a hawk, it can't swim. Okay, what good would, you know, big claws, big talons be for a duck? You know, the duck needs to swim around, and it needs to, you know, use its webbed feet for pushing through the water. So, you know, think of it in terms of what is it eating and where does it live. And some, you know, some beaks are kind of general purpose, but some of them are very, very specialized. You know, this avocet beak, or this kiwi beak, or the spoonbill, or the pelican. And they're specialized for certain jobs that they do very, very well. But there are always trade-offs, right? A parrot cannot eat the same thing as a duck. Like, physically, it can't. It can't grab onto the food in the same way. An eagle might eat fish, and a pelican eats fish, but they have very different beaks. So an eagle is going to catch the fish using its claws, using its talons to snatch the fish out of the water. The pelican is going to dive down and open this big net of a beak and catch the fish that way and swallow them whole. They're just trade-offs. No one size fits all. You know, a crow has kind of a general purpose, you know, foot for a bird foot. And a crow is kind of a general purpose bird, and it eats a whole bunch of different things. It's not as specialized in its diet. So when you see specialization for where it lives or what it eats, that's when you see specialized body structures. Okay, arthropods, big, huge, successful group of animals. The most successful group of animals, the largest phylum, and the exoskeleton is made of chitin. So that scorpion was an example. And its shell, kind of, its outer skeleton, it has no inner skeleton. It doesn't have any bones. The outer skeleton, and it is a skeleton because muscles still attached to it, and it's involved in movement, but it's made of chitin, which is a protein. And chitin, because arthropods are so abundant, chitin is actually one of the most common molecules on the planet. Well, organic molecules. One of the most common things built by life. The most common is cellulose, which, you know, is made by plants. But probably the second most common molecule made by living things is chitin. And chitin is pretty cool. It covers insects, it covers crabs and centipedes and scorpions and spiders. And it has some pretty cool properties, but we're not going to get into them right now. Arthritis has to do with swollen joints. Arthro is a joint. Poda is referring to the feet. Jointed feet is what arthropod means. Arthropoda is the phylum. So all these guys have jointed feet, and it's all one big group. Now, insects are the most important of the group in terms of the number of species. So they're their own class, and they are extremely diverse. So over half of all known animals are insects. So if you take all the fish and all the reptiles and all the mammals and all the birds and all the crabs and all the animals you can think of all the different species, insects, there are more insects than all of those others combined. So more than half of all total animals, that's a lot of insects. So more insects than all other kinds of animals combined, in terms of number of species. And also just in sheer numbers or sheer volume. There's so many insects out there. So how do you tell if it's an insect? Well, it's got 3 distinct body parts: a head, a thorax, which has legs attached to it and usually wings, and an abdomen. Head, thorax, and abdomen are the main parts of an insect. Usually has wings, usually has antenna, 3 pairs of legs, so 6 total legs. A compound eye, which has all these little tiny pieces to it. A simple eye, in that the lens just focuses at one distance. Some have 2 pairs of wings, some have 1 pair of wings. They breathe through spiracles, which are not shown here. Those are little holes, little openings in the abdomen. So if you pick up a grasshopper and you look closely at the abdomen, you'll see these little holes. And you'll also see the grasshopper squeezing its abdomen, which is how it's breathing. Okay. Insects have different forms of development. There's complete metamorphosis, which, there's an egg and there's a larva, like a maggot, a fly maggot, or a caterpillar, or a beetle larva, that looks totally different than the adult. And it has to pupate, it has to go through a stage where it's changing from larva to adult. So the pupa, for a butterfly, it goes into a cocoon or a chrysalis. And for a beetle, it just, this pupa is just underground. It's just a pupa. Anyway, it can't move during that stage. It's changing from one thing to another here. Others have an incomplete metamorphosis, where the nymph looks similar to the adult, and it just gets more and more adult characteristics as it grows. But even as a baby, you can tell, hey, that's a grasshopper. And so it's more of a direct form of development. So metamorphosis is an insect thing. It might be complete, it might be incomplete, where it's not a total complete change. And if the nymph looks different than the adult, it's referred to as a naiad. You don't hear the term naiad very often. Dragonflies, look up pictures of dragonfly larvae, and a dragonfly larva looks a lot different than the adult dragonfly. It doesn't look like a grub. It looks like its own creature, but it's definitely very different than the adult. So that's a naiad, where it has this very different, there, looks kind of like that. So a dragonfly is an example of a naiad, of a stage that looks, as a nymph, it looks very different than the adult. So a grasshopper, a young nymph grasshopper still looks like a grasshopper. A young nymph dragonfly larva looks nothing like a dragonfly. Okay. Is a spider an insect? No, it's not an insect. It's in its own order, the Arachna. And I have a spider. I have a tarantula, but she doesn't like me to pull her out just quickly. So if you want to see her, you'll have to come to my office or something. She's nice too, but we don't have a head, thorax, and abdomen. The head and thorax are fused into one thing, so we call it the cephalothorax. Cephalo is referring to the head, so head and thorax combined is a cephalothorax, or a prosoma. And instead of 3 pairs of legs, we have 4 pairs of legs. The scorpion is actually an arachnid, so it's more related to a spider than to a grasshopper, because it has 4 pairs of legs, and it has just 2 body sections, the abdomen and the cephalothorax. No wings, no antennae. Pretty diverse, about 30,000 species, but not nearly as diverse as insects, which millions of species. Arthropods include more than just insects and spiders. It also includes the crustaceans, which is lobsters, crabs, shrimp, even these roly-polies, these potato bugs. They are kind of like little miniature land crabs or land lobsters or land shrimp. They have many legs all together, They have these little body segments. They're very segmented. But most crustaceans live in the ocean. And so, you know, a few on land, a few in the fresh water, like crayfish are in fresh water. But mostly they're marine. They live in the water. A lot of them, you know, 30,000 species, and we like to eat them. So we like that about them. Well, I talked for a long time. We're out of slides, and so we're going to stop there. But arthropods, again, very successful, the most successful phylum. Crabs, crayfish, shrimp, potato bugs, they all have chitin on them because they are arthropods, like the insects, like the spiders, like the scorpions. Okay. In 10 minutes, I'm going to have a review session, hopefully. So I'll just get that started soon. Talk to you later. Bye.